have a chance to say hello.
Then thank you, David, and hello. So again, thank you for everybody for taking their time for being here. And I just will say a few words on behalf of Mike Ryan, who's the head of the emergencies in WHO, and who would just brief on this happening on this event. So he's expressed his gratitude as well for all the panelists, you, David, the crew who make this happen, and all of the people who are there using their time to listen to us. This is a public event. In preparation to this, we held 3 focus group webinars in which we try to have some lesson learned on what happened in this dreadful 2020 in terms of what happens in the past, which kind of key points are in common across the 3 main categories of mass gathering, being sport, the religious event, and all of those events like industry, the cultural, think of mega concert and the rallies and the political events and all of the industry events from mega car shows and so on and so forth. You will notice, as like in any webinar, there is a question and answer box and is a chat function. The purpose of this time together is to have an interaction from whoever is listening. So your question, your feedback, your interest, please do send us questions or curiosities or reflections in the Q&A box or in the chat functions. So the objectives of this time together will be having and spreading a risk-based approach to any decision making for this year, to close or to entertain, advance with the mass gathering. Because as you saw, all of the countries are in different phases. They are opening, they're closing, there is a vaccine, and there is a vaccine. There is so many different phases and pressures that are moving in time and space that can affect this decision making. So in terms of size of mass gathering, is not necessarily you have to be the hundreds of millions of the Olympics or a single wedding and a single small religious gathering can present some risk. These risks can be managed by certain measure, distancing, masking, washing hands, and those decisions on how to conduct and if to conduct should be risk communicated, should be told to the people, because so far and at the beginning of this experience, I'm thinking February or January or March 1 year ago, most of these when they were shut down without explaining the reasoning of that to the people, and that created anxiety. It's not just people losing the business or losing their job or not seeing the match on TV. It's just not knowing why that happened. So in this year, we advance the tools. All of the colleagues on and really friends now have been working with us, helping WHO throughout this period. We develop tools, we develop easier tools. We have been struggling and working hand to hand, sector to sector. And if we are having this conversation today, it's because all of you help us in having a better understanding of what the tools are. And not just how to apply the tools, but how to reapply and change the measure, how the situation evolves. So there is a stronger collective consciousness, as it can be argued, that is change across the people, across the peoples of the planet, that now sees events like this as a matter of hope, as a matter of not just a business or entertainment, but as a symbol on how this COVID is sweeping throughout the societies and what effects. So David is going to be your moderator, and I do thank him. He is a magician in keeping people stuck, unlike Italians. And I'll be here for any help. But let me think, and thanks again once more to all of you here with us today and giving us your time. David?
Mauricio, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. And just to remind all of you, as I look at the list of people and where you're coming from, at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom screen, there is a Q&A button. If you want to submit a question, then that is the button to use. We're not looking for detail and specifics necessarily as to perhaps how to clean a plastic seat, for example, but broader picture, very keen to bring your thoughts and your questions to our panelists. And we have quite an array as well. So I don't want to waste any more time. I want to really get on to this discussion, which is going to break down initially into the situation that all our panelists found themselves in at various points over the course of the last 9 to 12 months. And then we'll look a little bit later as to the future. What next, moving forward, and how much things have perhaps changed in people's thought processes as well as their analytical approach to COVID-19 and how to manage their own mass gatherings. So without further ado, I'm going to launch in, and I'll introduce the panelists as we go, because we've got quite a collection here. And I want to start with you, Richard, if I could. Richard Budgett. Richard is the Medical and Scientific Director at the International Olympic Committee. Give us a wave, Richard, so we know where you are. You are, I know, in a lot of meetings in any case at the moment, and maybe we'll reflect on that in a second. But here you were preparing for what some would say is the biggest show on earth, and then COVID-19 strikes. Just give us an idea, if you could, about how you then had to manage the risks in front of you before arriving at what was a huge decision.
Yes, it clearly wasn't me, although I was involved as the medical and scientific director. This was a huge decision to take, and was taken with all the evidence, and most importantly, in consultation with the World Health Organization. And to be fair, the WHO have been with us through many Olympic Games, through Zika, through norovirus, even through Ebola, and helped us through those. But nothing's been quite as challenging as this particular pandemic. So as you all know, the decision was taken last year, along with the Japanese health authorities, the Japanese government, the Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee, everyone agreeing this was the right thing to do to postpone the Games.
Right, this was, as you say, we're talking about risk-based approach, but with something that was on a scale that perhaps nobody had quite come to terms with before. And clearly, Richard, it's very difficult to simply provide an analytical, scientific view and take a decision. There's so much more that you've got to play with here.
Yes, and this is where the WHO tool that Maurizio was mentioning earlier, risk assessment mitigation tool, that you can, it will automatically populate itself and score when you put the details in there. And so we really developed that together with the WHO and other partners around the world. So when it's used, feedback goes to the WHO, and that improves further and further over time. And it's something that we did then, and we keep reviewing, because obviously the risk score changes as the scenarios change, and we plan on a number of different scenarios, be they worst case, best case, a base case scenario, etc.
Right, okay, and we will come back to that issue of unpredictability. But Peter, I'm going to throw over to you, Dr. Peter Harcourt. Peter is the medical advisor of the Commonwealth Games Federation, chairs the Federation of International Basketball Association's Medical Commission, and is also chair of the International Cricket Council's Medical Advisory Committee. So, Peter, A, thank you for being with us. B, you cover a wide variety of sports. Some are outdoor, some are indoor, so there are different challenges. And I think perhaps you see more than any if you like, the stakeholder challenge here, because it's not just about an organizer. It's not just about an event, it's also about the athletes, their expectations and their mental well-being, and that has to be brought into the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think back to a year ago when we started to see things going a little bit uneasy with the early stages of the infections, we really didn't know what we were confronting, and we were kind of on a steep learning curve. And that generated a whole lot of anxiety amongst our medical and healthcare practitioners, but also amongst the athletes that we were dealing with. And so early on, we recognised that we needed to have a plan based on the risk stuff that WHO had put on the table. And alongside that, deal with the mental health issues that were probably going to emerge, which they did. And you can see it now with some of the sports that I deal with. Say cricket was a good example, where we've had athletes who have been in confined bubbles for months and months in order to keep the competition going. And that has a toll on those individuals. So really having a plan around the needs of the individuals, as well as an overarching plan of how to manage the pandemic, go hand in hand.
Right, and what is the lesson then that you've learned already? Because as you say, putting people together for not just weeks, possibly months on end, as you say, when it comes to something like cricket, is immensely challenging in itself. Are there already ways in which you can see you can improve that situation? And just an aside, Peter, this morning I was at BBC World News doing my thing in front of in the studio, and we had a representative of Olympic athletes saying already, we just need to know if it's on or off with regard to that particular event. I mean, the same thing applies for them today as seemed to apply for them 12 months ago, that individual need for predictability where there really isn't very much.
Yeah, correct. And that's the uncertainty that you're dealing with, that the experts are dealing with, and things are evolving. The things that I think I've learned is to talk to people, gather as much information as possible. And that's a big bonus that's come out of the pandemic, is I'm probably communicating with 20 to 30 other CMOs around the world, talking about the issues we're confronting. And that's actually been quite positive. And the thing that did emerge is that you've got to talk to people down to the grassroots in order to understand what the issues are from their perspectives, along the line of what you just said, David.
I'm going to broaden it out a little bit here and move beyond sport into religion as well. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Dr. Anas Khan. Anas, if you could give us a quick wave so we can all see where you are. Anas is at the Ministry of Health in Saudi Arabia and part of the WHO Collaborating Center for Mass Gatherings Medicine. And you have a very specific role to play with regard to the Hajj. You also had some time compared to others perhaps to work out what the best thing was to do. Just talk us through how you arrived at the decision that you did take.
Yes, thanks, David, for the opportunity. So early on, when the pandemic starts, the few cases across certain countries in the world, we started to have an eye on what's happening and continuously doing our risk assessment, trying to design which are the factors that we need to keep monitoring, so we can always plug and play and see at which level we are. So our response will be tailored accordingly and swiftly. So this paid a lot easily. As soon as the few first cases appeared in our country, the decision was done immediately to hold Umrah, to suspend it, which is a smaller Hajj throughout the year. Usually smaller numbers, but it happened accumulatively all over the year. So it was done immediately, the decision based on our risk assessment tool, which we call JIDDA tool, which was developed in 2017 in collaboration with the WHO. So it is a strategic health risk assessment tool with all major components of the health system, either the capacity, the vulnerability, the probability of each outcome, with a major focus on infectious disease in general, in addition to the capacity. A major component also we put in is the reputational risk. So the Islamic world is looking for Hajj and Umrah to be happening regardless and continuously happening. But at the same time, till we did that, the Islamic world, the mosque, there was a huge resistance to have any measures, precautionary measures for from social distancing and public health interventions sort of. But when everyone heard that, even the Holy Mosque in Mecca was suspended all the activities and prayers and Hajj and Umrah, so the message was accepted back then in every country across the world that yes, it's serious and we need to do so, and the Islamic scholars allowed it to happen, so we can do it as well. So recognizing this this very heavy role that we need to play and hold ourselves to, and account ourselves for all these actions, so we'll know the impact that could happen across every other in mass gatherings, and we know all mass gatherings are not created equal.
No, nicely put. But that, let me just ask if you can now throw forward slightly as we stick on the Hajj just for a moment, to what you will do in 2021, because obviously the Hajj goes on. You had, what, 1,000 representatives last time. What are you going to do this time?
So definitely it's going to be much more, and most likely the scenarios are running in favor for having internationals, not only nationals and residents within the kingdom. But till now, no formal decision was announced yet. All scenarios are being considered. We did so many scenarios with the whole risk assessment plan, with the measures that we expect to be held, so we can have a safe Hajj. And now it's being done within the wholer or higher level, with the context of all the logistics and other implications on how we could really do it. Because as you know, we see now the logistics with the vaccinations. That was a major component we were relying on in our planning or assumptions. Now this is being under threat, especially that major countries sending pilgrims are the countries we more likely think they will not be able to have a huge coverage even to start with. So all this will be factored in to reach a decision as soon as we can.
Right, and just briefly to close on this point, the idea of having more people attending and from overseas as well, is that built on an appreciation that the level of risk is going to be reduced, or that logistically, in terms of communications as well, you are just much better set now to manage it?
Yeah, so I need to re-emphasize or reiterate, no formal decision is done yet. So given the scenarios, we're saying that it could happen from a health perspective planning point of view, if so many, and we have a big if in this situation, that we will be able to have a huge or significant or even most of the pilgrims vaccinated as well. And we can have a whole, what we call the journey of the pilgrim. We can sustain precautionary measures along the way. So from there, we can make sure that it will really happen.
Right, and thank you very much indeed for that. Thanks for laying that out for us. I want to turn to Canon Delene Mark now, Director of Hope Africa. Delene, thank you for joining us. I will just tell everyone that we've got no secrets here. You were joining us for a previous webinar and we had some internet issues. So this is a chance to really get your perspective now on this. Tell us briefly, if you can, a little bit about Hope Africa as a Christian charity, and then we'll look at the mass gathering challenge you faced.
Thank you. Well, I'm Delene Mark, and I work at an organization that's called Hope Africa. And we are the social development outreach program for the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. So our work, involved a lot of COVID relief immediately when the lockdowns began in the countries. And a major challenge was to figure out how to discourage the churches from having mass gatherings in their feeding programs and soup kitchens and that kind of assistance, while still being able to reach out to the community in some way. So we had to find creative ways to offer assistance to vulnerable households, by using vouchers through like text messages, and those kinds of initiatives that happened in Southern Africa. I suppose the biggest challenge was that churches closed with the recommendation, and it had to be the government as well closed all churches, and church leaders. We had to find ways to make sure that everybody stays connected, so that the same messages get out to everybody, in terms of how to properly social distance in a church service, making sure the building is ventilated, making sure there's a compliance officer screening people as well as taking down their details, and following the regulations when churches did eventually open. Even when churches were allowed to open, they remained closed for probably another 6 weeks. And most churches in Southern Africa opened in September when they thought they were ready to have church services, which posed a challenge in many places.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make about the early days and getting people to recognize the challenge. I don't mind saying I was actually in Cape Town in February at an international conference where we were congratulating ourselves that we'd beaten COVID, that we'd managed to host this event, we'd kept it going. In hindsight, we shouldn't have been there. And I imagine, particularly for a faith-based organization, and I'm going to bring Monsignor Robert Vitillo in here, Bob, that challenge of saying to worshippers, to parishioners, we've got to change the rules here. You can't just come in and have your normal congregation and get together. Just laying out a risk-based analysis doesn't always cut it, does it? And I would just say, I want to just get your title right, the Secretary General of the International Catholic Migration Commission and Attaché and Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the UN in Geneva. So perhaps you could just address that congregational challenge.
Yes, indeed. It's important to not only use the scientific language, but also to connect it to people's religious values and help them see that that they have a responsibility, not only in their own local communities, but for the whole world in a situation like this. So there's a lot of explanation that needs to go on. Also, in our case, with the Catholic Church, we already have very strong relationships with WHO and long history for myself to work with Maurizio on other pandemics. So we were able to get direct information from WHO, but then also contribute to discussions, especially in the EPI-WIN unit of WHO, and help them gather religious groupings from all over the world to hear the scientific issues, but then also to develop the ways for us to present that at the local level. That's one. Number two is, we had to fight against some instinctual kinds of tendencies. I was in the middle of March at a meeting in Cote d'Ivoire at Abidjan, and it was a meeting of African bishops. We had the hand sanitizers out. We encouraged people not to shake hands, but then we went over to have mass together, and the African bishops all were hugging me, and then I had to hug them back, because this was just a natural thing. We were brothers in the faith. So we again had to spend a lot more time explaining this to the religious leaders so that they could then present it to their local communities and help them understand that this is something we're doing on a temporary basis, and that there was a tradition for this. We had adapted worship services, and also we had exempted people from the obligation to come to Mass in other health crises, and so we were being responsible in this one as well. We had no idea how long it would take, and now we've learned that it's been for a long time.
Yeah, Delene, let me just bring you in on that, because I'm going to use a quote that I picked up a couple of weeks ago at the time of the Kumbh Mela in India, in the Ganges, best part of 1 million worshippers gathering to bathe in the Ganges. This was only a couple of weeks ago. And someone there said, India's not like Europe. When it comes to immunity, we're better. As if it wasn't something they needed to take a very risk-based attitude to. I know you work amongst many others with school children and the like, and I guess trying to communicate these sorts of messages to younger people in particular is extremely difficult still.
Exactly, David. And I think that when we saw the second wave in South Africa, certainly it started with teenagers spreading the virus, because after a couple of months being in lockdown, and coming to the end of the school year, there was lots of need to celebrate when the restrictions were lowered. And so parties and and gatherings of young people started, were also contributed to the spread. But I think the younger children seemed to be more able to cope because of all of the education that they get at school, and the importance of being in school and maintaining social distancing. We did see that the younger children seemed to be coping well with all of the restrictions and abiding by the rules. So the teenagers and young adults that were really difficult. So we have workshops and trainings with young people that have to go online. So we like awareness raising workshops on HIV and AIDS and TB, and working with young adult girls. So a lot of that work had to go. We had to use WhatsApp chats or Zoom calls, and they had to do a lot of that online, because we wanted to discourage these older kids from coming together and not complying.
Okay, well, look,
David,
yeah, Mal, go ahead.
Just to underline this point, it is true, India, or the quote that you made, different countries have different baselines. Different parts of the same countries have different baselines. Different age and different behavior in the same country as the different baseline. And if you include in this dialogue the travel and the transportation and the mobility, that becomes really complicated. So it is something that perhaps we should take in the landscape and keep it there. Back to you.
Absolutely, yeah, and that is part of the challenge. And actually, I'm going to bring, first I must say to Amy and to Matthew, thank you very much for listening for a moment. I want to hear your views in just a second, but I'm going to bring in Helmut, because I think you have to leave us before the end of this session, Helmut. Helmut Spahn is the Director for Security at FIFA, the International Football Federation, and we're talking there about youngsters, young adults. I mean, basically, we're talking from your perspective about players and fans in a way. That's your whole congregation, Helmut. Last year, 2020, you did what? You scrapped all internationals.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, David. We canceled for 2020 all our events and all our tournaments. So we had our FIFA Congress with our 211 member associations, the best award and council meetings all online. But at the end of the day, we managed some qualification matches because the World Cup 2022 in Qatar already started. We have to play 800 matches across the globe. And if we open a window for these matches, there is a mandatory release for players. So the clubs have to release the players to their national teams. They cannot decline. They must release the players. And then it's up to us also to help and to organize everything to make these events, these matches, as safe as possible. So, and therefore we worked together right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic with the WHO. We developed together a risk assessment and mitigation tool. It was distributed to all the 211 member associations, and we asked them to follow, let's say, this risk assessment and mitigation, which they did. Then we worked on an international match protocol with all the hygiene measures in place, testing, the whole organizational things, including travel. And it worked so far very well. We are playing at the moment without spectators. So it's not really a mass gathering, but if we talk about a match without spectators, we still talk about 350, 400, 500 participants in the stadium. So you have to organize it. The biggest challenge for us is to bring players from, let's say, across the globe to their home destination. For example, a lot of Brazilian players, for example, they are playing in Germany, in the UK, in Italy, in Spain, and they have to travel. So we have to manage everything. We have to find out what kind of restrictions in place, what kind of measures they have to take, quarantine, PCR tests, and for now, and that's the reason why I have to step out a little bit earlier. We have a meeting with CONMEBOL, the South African Confederation, before the meeting here. We had a meeting with CONCACAF, North America and the Caribbean to prepare for the March window, where we play, I think, 150 matches, and I hope everything will go well.
Well, I imagine also in terms of coordination, so you're talking about what you can do, how you can make it work, you know who you would need in a stadium, for example, but you also know better than any of us that if you have Brazil playing a match at home against England, for example, it's going to be very difficult to stop a certain number of football fans coming to get a glimpse of their heroes in any case. So the need to coordinate across various sectors of your world and through the transportation of the players, their accommodation, the policing, presumably that is more intense now than perhaps you've ever had to experience before.
Yeah, absolutely. We are in close contact with all, let's say, the health authorities in the different countries, with the police, the governments, also to get some exemptions, let's say, for the players to travel. We will play, for example, our first event since the beginning of the pandemic, now in Qatar from the 4th of Feb until the 11th of Feb, the FIFA Club World Cup. So we have clubs from South America, from Brazil, from Germany, Bayern Munich, from AFC, from the Middle East. And there is a strong, let's say, protocol in place. We have a bubble concept. So all the referees, the teams are in a bubble for a couple of days. There is a testing every 2 days, every 3 days for different groups. And we decided also, together with the authorities in Qatar, to allow 30% of the capacity of each of the stadium for the attendance of the spectators. But all the spectators, for example, they have also be tested, a PCR test, to get their ticket. And we will organize everything to keep the minimum distance, all the other hygiene measures. And yeah, I hope it will work well. And yeah, that will be, let's say, maybe the first step to a little bit normal.
Yeah, I think there's a sense coming out already from the panel that there's a sort of almost like a synthesis of risk analysis and assessment and knowledge sharing, perhaps to a degree, that's bringing people to some common levels of understanding of what is and isn't acceptable in different ways. Amy, let me bring you in here now, if I could. You're the CEO of the Events Industry Council. My goodness, that's an industry that it was hit for six, as we would say in a cricketing term. And I guess also for you, with a challenge of having to explain to your members what is and isn't the right protocol, the right steps to take. Very difficult when you know that people's entire livelihoods, their businesses, are on the line here.
Yeah, it's so true, David. So, you know, when you think about business events, one of my big learnings is we're somewhat misunderstood, right? So we're sort of a meta industry in that we touch all vertical sectors, all global geo regions. And, you know, and if you look at the stats on an annual basis, you know, we have over 26 million people that work in our industry. We touch over 1.5 billion participants annually. Our global GDP is over, you know, 1.5 trillion on an annual basis. So it's just this massive engine that I think has sort of been below the line of visibility in terms of what we do, right? So, you know, when we came together, you know, in early 2020, when we realized what was happening and what we might do to think differently about how we best serve not only our members, but our broader constituency, right? We had to think about, you know, that which we know and we've been doing all along, you know, really having a real keen commitment to duty of care and understanding risk assessment and risk mitigation and all of those things. We also had to look at it from the perspective of we were on a journey to eventually rebuild trust and confidence, you know, within our sector, that not only did we have the expertise to successfully hold business events, but that we were putting together programs that people valued and would return to once they felt comfortable. The other notion that we tried to raise, and, you know, if we're anchored to this common belief that business events are serving a purpose greater than just driving economic impact, we also looked at then what is the role of the individual and the participant, in this journey, and really trying to rely on them to engage in this notion of they have personal responsibility in their own well-being and making smart decisions about participation that can ultimately contribute to, our rebuilding. And so, yeah, it's been quite an endeavor, but we've really kind of come together. And I agree with a lot of the comments. We've had a coalition mindset. We've been unified in ways that we haven't been, as strongly connected previously, to, really do some powerful group thinking to show up to best support our workforce. And I think it's really been a great learning experience for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you have to do as you're told in terms of major conferences. If the national government position is you cannot host it, you cannot host it. We get that. At the same time, adaptability is key for you. It's sort of survive or die, isn't it? So, in a sense, what we're seeing here now is a great accelerator of potential for you.
For sure. I mean, I think it's a good opportunity for this industry to sort of redefine that which we do, and why we exist in the first place, and also remind people that we do have the acumen to create safe environments, taking into consideration all the measures that are so important, these risk assessment and mitigation measures, because we are working with a different set of participants that we can, we can see and rely on to be our partners in this journey.
Yeah.
So, I think it's an important piece of sort of discerning that which we do versus other types of events, but all of them, I think we're all really concerned with our frontline workers and those people that have been so massively disrupted, and wanting to find ways to ensure people understand, how the various sectors, the creative class, the gig workers, all the first responders all really come together, even in normal circumstances, to support events and how we best ensure their viability and their future.
I should just say at this point, your comments so far, panel, are eliciting an absolute wave of questions, many of which we will attempt to answer perhaps behind the scenes, because we're just not going to get through them all. I've got a few in front of me as well, which I'll come to in a moment. But Matthew, I want to come straight to you now, because as a screenwriter, director and producer, I imagine your life has inevitably changed to an extent, and you seem to be in a world where you're either massively regulated and very correct, or frankly, probably massively unregulated and not always terribly correct. And that must be a frustration as much as anything else in terms of the sort of the fairness of mitigation measures against the coronavirus.
Yeah, it can be a little confusing and dysregulating, but I think that, as many of the panelists have spoken to, I really do feel a kind of coalescing of our business, and this is very humbling. The level and scope of what people are talking about as the lone representative of Hollywood film production. Got to make our TV shows at any cost. But so it's interesting to think about it in this wider perspective. But there is an importance, obviously, in my opinion.
Sorry, Matthew. Sorry to interrupt you. Are you sort of saying that you do live in a world where they'll cut the corners because perhaps some of them think they are a bit more important than the challenges they're facing?
Well, that's interesting. I don't feel like that anymore so much. I really do feel that on the production side, now there is, parenthetically, there certainly is a bottom line consideration from the people who write my checks. But I would say that our production teams and our production companies take limitation and sort of mitigation measures very seriously. And it's become, because there's always an almost, to any good film set, there's an almost military structure to it. And they've been able to incorporate these measures really well. Now, that's not to say that there are not individuals who, when the production shuts down for the evening, don't break out, but that's, and go out and party and cause the whole production to shut down. And that's the nature of the personalities and, the kind of inherent levels of narcissism that exist in our industry.
It's not only in your industry, obviously. It's something different
David,
ways. Wow, did you want to jump in there?
Just another of those horizontal reflections. It's not just the single event that all of the panelists are doing, but think for a moment the examples and the anthropological standard behavior that they are setting up. So I remember the old days when the seatbelts were introduced and everybody was trying to circumvent, until now is becoming socially accepted. Actually, if you don't do it, you are the one ostracized. Similarly, the role of the panelists is not just to having the running of the player or the basketball or the Olympics and so on, but also for the multiplier, the production, the organization of a conference that reaches so many people and instills and confirms positive reinforcing behavior.
That point about behavioral patterns is key. Maurizio, I can tell you, I had a great aunt who refused to use a seatbelt because she said she'd be quicker at getting out of an accident if she didn't have one than if she did. It's a very, very challenging area. But that brings me to a question that I have here, actually, from whoever submitted it. You'll know, but I think there are a few. I've been looking at the chat. There are a few that relate to this. And it says here, how do we mitigate disinformation in the religious institutions to encourage influencers and trusted voices in religious circles and communities to spread accurate and reliable informations and guidelines? So, Bob, let me start with you on that. That there is always going to be either disinformation or a simple unreadiness to accept the reality of what we seem to be seeing in front of us. How do you deal with that? And how respected do you think the senior figures are when they try to do so?
Well, first of all, I think that there is a lot of respect for the senior figures in religious organizations, and certainly I've seen that happen a great deal with Pope Francis, who's really been an example both around the social distancing, in the protection of others, and calling attention to the need to share the treatment and vaccines with everyone. At the same time, as I said earlier, I think we have to help the religious leaders understand what we're talking about in terms of the scientific dynamics, but also link it to their own religious teachings. However, I think that, we also have to understand that some of the disinformation is not based on religion at all. It's a real abuse of religion. And I think so. And I think we wind up with a problem when some people are so ready to blame religion for things when it really is a politicization, or it's simply people who are trying to promote their own gains. So I think we have to distinguish in many different ways here.
Would you accept that there has been, I mean, if I can put it this way, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a sort of tightening of discipline nonetheless over the course of a year amongst many religious organizations?
Yes, I think so, definitely. And I've seen, at least within the Catholic Church, of, some disciplinary measures being taken by certain people who, with good intentions, thought that they were respecting the most sacred or the most holy actions, and therefore they didn't want to take these precautions. So I think there has been a tightening. At the same time, I think there's been an unfair restriction for some religious services when different mass gatherings were allowed to exist. So I think we again have to look at a fair application of the restrictions across all barriers.
Let me just say to all of you, all my panelists, do jump in if there's a point on one of these issues you want to get in, because I would be very sorry to miss you and you had wanted to say something. We're going to have a short little interlude in a way in a moment, because I want to hear from Johns Hopkins University. Before we do that though, Peter Harcourt, just a question, whilst it's not a religious one, you must be confronted nonetheless with a lot of young elite sportsmen, but indeed many who are perhaps at club level and what have you, who also do not want to recognize what this world is actually facing, because generally speaking, the younger, the slightly more cavalier, but also the less affected they are. How easy is it to persuade them that they have got to heed these regulations? Does the risk-based approach work with them?
Yes and no, and Bob sort of touched on it with leadership. And really what you're trying to do is win over the hearts and minds of all the different people that work within your industry, in the case of cricket or basketball or Australian football. And that means you have to really have strong communication and get them all on the same page, heading in the right direction. And someone else also touched on this. You have to manage behaviours. That's at the heart of this. You have to have people managing social distancing, wearing masks, hand sanitizing, personal hygiene, all those things. So really you have to get people on board, and that requires good communication. And you also need a compliance element. And sport has rules, it's a regulator, and we use the rules as part of the way of getting people on the same page as well. So proactively leading them, but also using a little bit of a stick if there's a problem.
Yeah, Richard. And then Amy.
Can I just reflect on that? And I absolutely agree with Peter and the speakers who've gone before, that, you know, whenever you've got a complex, large event, it's about the communication. Certainly we're looking at communicating all the rules and regulations and the best practice. And although for an event you might produce a glossy brochure with all the detailed protocols, it's actually what you give out to the participants that's really important. So in our case, we're thinking of a playbook which will be simple, understandable, and lead to this change of behavior that Peter's talking about. And then you need responsible people within each of your stakeholder groups, which we're going to call liaison officers or something like that, who can actually make sure that everyone's read it, everyone's understood it, and they understand the implications. Because of course, there's never going to be zero risk with any event. And it's about mitigating that risk and helping people to see that they can be part of the correct behavior to mitigate that risk. Because however good you are with all the travel and the hygiene and PPE and the distancing and the testing and hopefully the vaccines, it's the behavior that will do it in the end.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is that regardless of what type of an event or sector you serve, we've all become very sort of ritualistic in the events that we attend, and then our behavior during those events. And, you know, there might be some of that we want to carry forward, and that there might be some of those rituals that are no longer going to serve us. But the notion of, you know, coming together and congregating in a certain way during times like this is just not possible. And so we have to think about setting expectations.
And David, you should see the enormous power of these people. And if Matthew, for instance, has an idea to have some COVID messaging at the end or the beginning of any movie, or you have the Michael Jordan of the Dream Team checking on the behavior to make sure that the junior behave. So there are some innovation in implementation that people like our panelists are the actual creator of those new way of doing things.
But you can talk about communication, Maurizio, all you like. You can talk about changing people's behavior all you like, there is a price to be paid for an awful lot of people with this when they are restricted to the levels that so many of us are being restricted now. And I think we touched on it, but I want to come back to it because a lot of questions are coming up about mental health. And at what point do you have to factor that in when you think about how far you go in terms of restricting people? And I wonder who would like to pick up on that?
So I will just say for our event sector, you know, we're talking a lot about well-being in our workforce. And I think this idea of well-being does go back to the individual's role in sort of assessing their own readiness. And if the experience of coming together in person, you know, is impacting their well-being, then they have to go through a process by which they evaluate, you know, the benefits of doing so or potentially, you know, postponing. And I think that that's one of the conversations we're trying to talk about. I think that's fundamentally good news, though, because I believe wholeheartedly that, you know, all of that which we do and those people we serve, the most fundamental thing that we do is to foster human connections, right? And how that helps individuals' growth, learning, and overall well-being is not to be undervalued and bodes well for our long-term future. So.
Yeah. But Anas Khan, what do you say to those who are not among the 1,000 only who can take part in the Hajj? Or, okay, it might be more this year, but there are people who live for that and they can't do it. How do you look after them?
Yeah, so definitely Hajj holds a major role within the Islamic rituals. It's the fifth of 5 pillars, but it always comes with a connotation that it is Hajj for whom he can. So it's always limited to the ability physically. Is it financial? Is it for different circumstances? In this situation, the pandemic will has its limitations. And by also, there is another saying within Islam, by saving someone, one life, you are saving the whole humanity. So this is the rituals that we are trying to disseminate through by engaging the religious leaders, that the message is by living in peace with the fact that you will not be able or missing the opportunity this time, that you're contributing to the good of doing an enormous, in good faith, about saving the others, not allowing this to disseminate further and for the pandemic to continue ongoing.
That's a really important message, isn't it? Making people feel good about the fact that they are towing the line, as we would say. Deline, sorry, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, David. I was going to say is on the issue of mental health. It's an important question that's being addressed with churches and religious organizations in Southern Africa, because what normally happens is that, or what happens is that once people who need to go to church weekly and have that connection often live alone and at home, and so you know they needed to find ways for religious leaders to reach out to those people and to make sure that, you know, not just physically, but they were also mentally being taken care of, and their spirituality as well. And then, of course, the church at a broader level has to address how it takes care of the mental health of the priests and pastors, because they are not able to do some of the things that priests are called to do, especially at funerals or at you know, when people are sick and visiting sick people, and also ministering to people who are dying and performing those last rites. And the fact that they're performing so many funerals now during COVID, and you know, so just generally their mental well-being is an issue that is being looked at.
You brought up an issue of funerals there and closure. I'm going to come on to that actually, because I do want to bring in at this point someone who helps provide the sort of data that I think a lot of us look at perhaps too frequently, actually. I mean, I work in news, so I feel an obligation. Every day I go into the studio to get up the Johns Hopkins University latest figures and data on numbers of infections globally and country by country. And Lucia Mullen is with us. Lucia is senior analyst for the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the WHO Collaborating Center for Global Health Security, and the Novel Coronavirus 19 Mass Gatherings Expert Group. So Lucia, thanks very much for being with us. There's not much data you don't know about this issue. Just tell us a little bit more in terms of the data you are gathering and how that can help us in this sort of discussion.
Certainly, thanks for having me, David. As you mentioned, we love collecting data. And so, you know, one of the things that we've all been hearing from the esteemed panelists here are that they've been using these risk-based approaches, and many have been either using some that they've had prior connection with WHO for, some of the ones that we developed as the mass gathering expert group for WHO at the beginning of this pandemic. And that was really because WHO wanted to provide not only guidance, but tools where event organizers could make these informed decisions themselves, but show that there must be a priority on ensuring these decisions were made using a risk-informed approach. And so those are the tools that are often being referred to here. We've made kind of variety of tools that are available on the WHO website for generic mass gatherings, sports, and religious specific events as well, that really fall under the three pillars of risk evaluation, risk mitigation, and risk communication. So for the risk evaluation, this is really asking questions to try and help event organizers and collaborators identify what areas of their mass gathering would hold the risk, whereas the mitigation section looks at how we can actually reduce that risk. But you know, keeping in mind, as Richard had mentioned, risk can never be zero, so there'll always be a risk. And this comes into the third and final pillar, which is probably arguably the most important one that the colleagues have mentioned today, the risk communication section. It doesn't matter how many measures we put in place if they're not effectively communicated to the participants, we can't make sure that these measures are implemented properly and therefore reduce that risk effectively. So we wanted to develop a database that helps catalog some of these efforts. And the first thing we did was go through and try and start finding, you know, I can't say all because there's so many, but as many as possible mass gatherings for 2020 and now looking forward into 2021. And what we are doing for WHO is trying to not just answer the what and when of what is the event and when is it occurring, but look a bit further into the details of what decisions were made about it, how were these decisions decided, and most importantly, was a risk-based approach used? This informs WHO's strategic preparedness and response plan as an indicator. So one of the things we've been monitoring is the number of countries that have an event where they made a decision to either postpone the event, to cancel it, otherwise modify it, and did they use a risk-informed approach to do so? And what the great news is, and what you've been hearing from the speakers today, is largely that answer is yes. Currently, we're at about 80% of countries that have been hosting mass gatherings during this pandemic are making decisions using risk-informed processes. If we break it down to the events themselves, that percentage obviously goes down. We're currently at just under 50%, which is still very good, but it shows that we still have a lot of work to promote this idea and try and help event organizers where we can set up risk-informed processes to make sure that more and more events are being decided in this scientifically driven way. We're also looking at tracking data temporally here. So as many of the event organizers have said, and as you, David, have mentioned at the beginning, when the pandemic first happened, we had some very quick decisions. And so as expected in March and April, our database has shown that a lot of events were just canceled arbitrarily. As we move further into the latter part of 2020, we saw that events were going ahead, and most of them, a good 60-70%, were actually going ahead in a modified format, whether that was made virtually or with a lot of mitigations in place to make sure that they could be still held safely. So we're interested to see how that changes throughout 2021 as well. A lot of this database is still kind of unfolding as we go along, and we're looking at ways to provide this data publicly for WHO to use, and also to give to event organizers so they can use and kind of support their own lessons learned collected from it. So it's still a work in progress, but it's something we're getting.
I'm just going to ask you, someone's just put a question up which is intriguing. Can the database be used not only to look at these decisions and sort of collate the numbers, but to track effects of mitigation measures?
Yes, it's not something we have right now, but we've actually been in talks with WHO on the additional data we want to use. We've expanded our team not only here at WHO, but we also have some fabulous students that are aiding with the database itself. So we're looking at what additional data we can have, and some of that will be looking at, can we link, clusters to events themselves to see if the event was held safely, and if so, what mitigation measures are considered most effective.
Right. Lucia, thank you very much for that. We're going to have a look now at throwing this forward as far as we can. And I'm going to start with a question that I've received here because it sums it up. How does the panel foresee the end of the pandemic and mass gatherings returning to normal, ? Will we ever go back to pre-COVID? Peter, if I start with you, I do so because I suspect a lot of youngsters, a lot of athletes, a lot of sports people would like to think, great, well, soon we'll get back to getting down to the rugby club, playing our match, enjoying the beers. Oh, I think Helmut, are you waving goodbye, Helmut, or have you got a quick comment before you go?
No, it was the wave to say goodbye. I have to leave. Sorry for that. There was a question in the chat if it's, let's say, really responsible to hold the event in Qatar. Maybe if you allow me 1 minute, because there was also a misunderstanding in regarding to the attendance. There were no international spectators allowed, so only locals. Yeah, with the pre-testing and everybody who is traveling into the country have to go to the bubble. So for me, there is also, let's say, a procedure in place, a pre-test prior departure. Then I arrive in Doha, then I'm tested. I will taken by car into my hotel room. I can't leave the hotel room until I get a negative result, and then I have to follow all the other bubble rules. So I think it's responsible to do it, taking into consideration all the risk assessment, the mitigation measures, and then health comes first for us, and if not, then we will not allow to have spectators inside the stadiums.
Important to give us the clarification too. Helmut, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Good luck to all of you. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Have a good meeting. Have a good. Most of us will be Zooming after this somewhere as well. So Peter, let me just bring you back to that point about, I mean, we used to talk about the new normal. I mean, I think we just talk about normal now because it's been going on for so long. Can you ever get back? Do you think the younger generation really appreciate that maybe we'll never get back to that good old fashioned way of playing our sports?
I think we will get back. And I think this will probably happen again at some stage. And we will have been much better off for having gone through it and learned so much. The thing that sort of strikes me about the last year is I've learned so much from other people, shared information, I've shared information, and you just see what's happened in Asia with some of the previous coronavirus epidemics. Those countries did reasonably well. Some of them did reasonably well. It's because they learned. And I think that's us, isn't it, as human beings? All of us are striving to get back to normal, and we've achieved a lot in the last 12 months when you think where we were back then. So I'm really confident, but we won't be the same because we've all learned from this experience. It's been pretty tough. And I think we will have learned from it, and we'll be better for it when it happens again. Having said that, this will take a while to settle down. We're not out of the woods, and the vaccines will help, but it'll still take quite a while for us to get through this.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a fair comment. I'm sure everyone would share. Deline, let's get a view from a different part of the world, really, in Southern Africa. Do you think there's just a waiting for everything to return to normal, or culturally a change in attitude now?
In some ways, I guess most people are just waiting for things to go back to normal, especially, to have more fuller churches and, have a large unrestricted attendance at funerals and weddings. But there's also a deliberate focus on looking at some traditions and rituals and how we need to do things differently going forward. And also, I think, some of the churches have seen the benefit of using technology where they can still continue with this kind of online services where they reach out to people who can't physically come to the church building.
That is clearly the case, isn't it, in a number of circumstances. Matthew, in a way, I think culturally for you as well, there are shifts taking place, aren't they? And maybe they were anyway in terms of, I mean, look, I don't know who's got Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever it might be, but there's a different approach to viewing and to filming now. And maybe COVID is just an accelerator of that. Maybe it's a cause.
I think it's been a massive accelerator. I think that sadly, most of our, movie theater experiences are behind us. I think that industry has really taken a potentially fatal hit. And I think we were headed that way, but in a much more gradual fashion. So, and we definitely we've changed everything about the way we shoot. I'm getting ready to go to Cuba to make something, and that's, that's an entirely different experience from the last time I shot there.
Wow. So,
David.
Sorry, just a moment, Mo. I just want to clarify that. So you can see the days of going to the movies as numbered.
I do. I mean, I think that it was already, we were already heading in that direction. And sadly, I just think that I think that it's becoming and will become a more niche experience.
Wow. Time to get out of popcorn.
It breaks my heart. But yeah,
absolutely. Maurizio.
I always wanted to be David for a moment in my life. So let me play David for Matthew. What is the issue about the storytelling? So we understand the theater and the popcorn, but how this pandemic impacted the storytelling? I know the time is short, it's only 1 year, but if you see the type of movies, the type of stories that people watched, how that impacted you just moving into series because you're selling more publicity, or how does it work with the storytelling?
Boy, that's a big question. That's its own thing, but it's a great question, and I'm really interested to see how storytelling will change. A lot of what we're seeing now is just the kind of trickling leftovers of things that were made before the pandemic restrictions were in place, and we're just now starting to make the things that we're going to make as a response, spiritually, psychologically, and physically to the pandemic. And so, I noticed that the things that I'm writing in my dark little chamber are different, and that the stories are more about, I'm taking it more seriously, and even though people are desperate for just entertainment right now, and I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to see a lot of really dumb entertainment, which is important too. But what I'm feeling is, wow, I better make this count. This is my little cry into the universe, from my little place of isolation. I better make it good, and, I better make it matter. And, even if that piece is a piece of weird comedy or whatever it is, I want it to cause a little tiny bit of a flicker of light out there. So,
wow, that's a really important message and a challenge as well. I mean, Amy, if I could, it's a similar sort of theme there. So we see the death of the movies, and COVID's accelerated that. Do we see the death of a significant number of business conferences, of those mass gatherings? I mean, do you have to accept that is the impact that COVID has had?
So I think in the near term, we'll continue to see smaller numbers for events that happen on an annual basis. I think that will ebb and flow, as Peter, indicated, as we start to think about, our long-term future. I mean, most of the models are saying that we'll get back to levels that, we were seeing in 2019, which were record-setting by, 2023, 2024. And hopefully we will be better prepared for what comes next. But also, as Matthew's noted, more concerned around the experience itself. And are we creating a valuable experience that people are finding meaningful and will want to return to for the right reasons, right? So, and I think back to this point about how might they be different and welcoming environments, we're using more omni-channel approaches and thinking about our events in a less siloed way, but more over a continuum of how we build community and deliver content. So, and I think that's, ultimately a good thing. And I also think, back to our sector and what we do, we have an opportunity to be more committed to the things that really matter. And, obviously our workforce and sustainability and how we not only, drive business outcomes, but build communities and can tackle some pretty big issues around social justice. So that's where we're spending our time, thinking about building back stronger, regeneration, and all of those things that really matter. And we've had an opportunity to think more clearly about it during this time, which has been, really a gift in many ways.
Well, that you've got to draw the positives, haven't you? And I think I would share that view that I think some events and conferences become little more than a habit. And perhaps a bit of creativity could go a long way. Delene, you are waving frantically, so over to you.
I wasn't waving at you, David, but now that you've asked me to speak, I just to say in terms of one of what happens with big churches like the Anglican Church or the Catholic Church is that they have large annual meetings, and I think that the realization is that they need to move to more online and smaller gatherings and not encourage where people have to fly into a venue and spend a couple of days together. And so I think we've, in our church, in the Anglican Church, we've taken that decision now to have all of these national gatherings online as opposed to face-to-face.
And you think that could be a permanent thing?
I think so. I think they've seen the benefit of saving on travel, as well as saving on accommodation and food, and where those funds can be invested in technology and also invested in outreach into the community.
Interesting. That's more than just risk-based, isn't it? Quite clearly. Richard, I've got to ask you, we've got Tokyo 2021 gradually hoving into view. There are still many challenges. I think no one would hide away from that, and Japan has to deal with its own issue with regard to the coronavirus. Unpredictability is a huge challenge and a bit of an enemy, isn't it? And one of the problems when we talk about risk-based approaches is that public opinion can have a life of its own as well. So I guess it's a question about communication again, but the clarity of message is critical, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And it's a matter of building confidence. And we can do that. We're used to the concern about the games being very high in the months leading up to it. And then normally, as you get nearer to the games, there's an acceptance, whether it's about Zika or any other issue, that actually, they can be run successfully. And I think more and more people will see it as the light at the end of the tunnel, something that marks us coming to really towards a post-corona world, which is what we're talking about. And I was just wanting to comment, although it's not about us holding the Olympics, one of the major roles for the medical and scientific department within the IOC is education of all our entourage medical staff. And we hold a number of both relatively small and quite large events on a rolling basis through the calendar. And the way we're obviously having to postpone some, but going towards a hybrid model where you have the option of attending if you can, which people still love to do because part of it's the networking, but also being able to attend remotely if for whatever reason you can't. So I think that in this post-corona world, there'll be an added value to events where, yes, you can still go and a lot of people will want to take part, but you'll be able to get more people taking part because you have this hybrid system, which we're being forced into.
Interesting. There's a message here saying we're taking, I say we rather royally, the panel is taking a rather pessimistic view on what the new normal might look like. I don't know, Bob, is it pessimistic, realistic? What do you think?
I don't think that it's pessimistic at all. I think it is realistic. We have to see that we have to develop different behaviors that are more respectful of each other. I'm glad that Amy raised the whole issue of social justice, and especially you, Amy, who have lost a lot in terms of your industry. For you to be generous enough to be thinking about that is important. So I think we are becoming more realistic, and I hope we will stay that way. At the same time, I think the fact just today, we've had over 300 people on this program. If we had done this, in a physical gathering, many of the people who are on this program could not have afforded to come and would not have had the opportunity that we are now making available through these kinds of gatherings. It's not the same as, having coffee and dinner and a drink with each other, if we believe in drinking. But I think that there's still a lot that we could learn from this experience. At the same time, I think we have to look beyond the mass gatherings. We have to really ask what normal was before and what it should be now, and especially look towards solidarity. The WHO Executive Committee just finished yesterday, and it was very clear the kind of vaccine nationalism that already exists, even though people promised they wouldn't have it. They're stocking vaccines when very few vaccinations, almost none, have been given access in Africa. And Africa is going to be facing a big, big problem. So I think that, we need to look at what normal is, both around mass gatherings and in general in the world.
Maurizio, can I just bring you in here? Because this issue about levels of pessimism or realism, the remark was made apropos of vaccines. We went hallelujah when they came. They're here to help us. Everyone's gradually being, well, not everyone, but as Bob pointed out, but they are being administered. Doesn't that mean that, we've got to assume they're efficient, effective, and are going to help us get back on track?
The vaccine is only one of the many tools, washing hands and mask and distancing, that split moment that each of us is learning whether I should go and follow up and hugging my grandmother or a child is okay. So as we do, we are taught at the beginning of our life how to cross the road and watch left or right if you are in UK. That type of instinct is now modifying. You're walking in the street, and when you see somebody closing to you, we take that little distancing on. So that will be part of a new, or washing your hand twice as much as I do as a kid. So those are measures that, together with the vaccine, will shape the society and so on. So if you see an elderly person, that moment, am I hurting her more if I don't hug? Or may I contaminate, may I spread the virus and hurt her more if I hug? So the vaccine is important. There will be different vaccine. There will be competition between the vaccines and the population and the variants of the virus, like in any other disease. So these dynamics we have 2 million deaths so far, David. And we have almost about the same number in flu. On the other hand, the world is on its knees now, and it's not happening last year for a flu season. Oh, back to you.
Well, I was just going to say, I recognize that a good number of you on the panel in particular, and indeed probably all of you listening and watching as well, are well versed in one aspect or another of the issues surrounding the coronavirus and how to deal with it, particularly in mass gatherings. But Maurizio, no one more than you. And I just wonder if I could throw this at you as well. Do you feel better educated, in a better place now? Have you learned lessons in the course of the last 9 to 12 months, which A, help in the future, but B, perhaps you think, gosh, I wish I had been better positioned 12 months ago?
Yeah, I should have slept more when they have the occasions. I think, but all of the people on this call, all the friends here, should have been living more when they had the occasion. It is not only that we learn more every day. But the capacity I was mentioned to share knowledge left and right, asking problem the religious people to the sport solutions and vice versa, and consulting Amy and Matthews. So this type of dialogues across was there on the planet, never so much. So there are, and I agree with Bob, elements of positive developed that we came together in the dearest of the moment. And the balance, the mental health between being sad, but also be able to watch the match or to go to church, or the people bringing food one door to the other. So there were 80,000 people delivering pizza all in Italy in November and went on strike just last November. And then we're 500,000 nowadays. We eat difference, we think difference. Over.
Yeah. It's amazing how things have changed. I've just got another line here. Sleep. Oh, how we miss long, lovely sleeps, it says from one of our contributors. It's crisis as the new normal in a way, isn't it, for many people, I think. Delene, you raise, I don't want to close on too somber a note, but you raised that issue of closure, of people who have died for whatever reason, but the inability or the circumstances are not there for many people to have what we would call natural and often religious traditional closure. What do we do about that?
Well, David, I think it gives us an opportunity to look at the traditions and interrogate some of them and see whether we can let go of some and introduce some newer traditions. You know, I think it's when even listening to my colleagues in the UK, when they speak about when there's a funeral, the whole community comes to the church. So it's difficult to control during this time. But just understanding that funerals have been identified in most cases, especially in South Africa, as super spreader events. So it's absolutely necessary to put some regulations in place and to look at how to do funerals differently, and what some of the traditions like the all-night vigils and you know, the social afterwards, whether that is necessary for that to go on.
We've also talked, well, a lot for an hour and a half now about mass gatherings. And in many cases, if we take the Hajj, for example, as Anas was explaining, these are gatherings on a huge scale. I just want to ask a little bit about the smaller scale meetings, just little gatherings that make up the fabric of our lives, whether we have a music appreciation group or an art class or whatever. This is a question that's being raised. How do we get those running again? Bob, it could be exactly the same in many different gatherings within the Catholic Church, for example. Are you starting even to do that?
There's some start to it, but again, I think we've had to learn to respect those who are still afraid or who prefer not to be part of the physical gatherings. And so, for example, in a local parish that I help out in Geneva, they've begun to have much more virtual availability, even of the meetings or the scripture classes and things that they're having physically as well. I think we have to respect that and have alternatives available for those who cannot be together physically. And then, of course, continue the hand washing, the social distancing, the different behaviors that we still need to continue when we bring people together physically.
I think, Amy, it's even on those very small level meetings, which are critical. And I think Bob said, you know, just the chance to meet, have a drink together, a coffee, what have you. I mean, that's where a lot of your business is made.
Yeah, I mean, you know, back to the point about pessimism, I mean, I'm very optimistic, right? And one of the things that allows me to be so, I think, is that we've seen over the course of the year that the smaller meetings are still happening through the professional expertise and the information that we have, you know, due in large part to partnerships with, you know, WHO and practices that have been in place for quite some time, right? So we know that, again, there's a whole host of things that go into doing that in the right way. And a lot of it comes down to the individual's willingness to participate, and then being respectful as organizers around creating ways for participation in the near term that would allow someone to have access if they weren't able to be there in person. And I think, back to Richard's point about the hybrid model or the omni-channel model, I mean, that's a wonderful thing for us to take away as a sector as we come out of this, is that, beyond the pandemic, we're an industry that likes to welcome and build community and create environments that do so. And so we have to have a number of ways for people to participate, given their own personal circumstances. But yeah, I mean, we've had trade shows that have happened successfully. I think it's really a journey in communication too. And I think we've talked about that today. How do we best share case studies around things that are happening successfully? What were the learnings, so we improve as we go? And I love what Lucia said about gathering more insights and finding new ways to share them. We're doing that as an industry. And I think we have to recognize that we're in a moment in time where people are still trying to figure out their own business continuity plans and their own financial circumstances and how best to take care of their best resource, which is their human capital. And so they'll prioritize as they go.
So with in the mix of social behavior, the communication message, there is a sense of adaptability going on. I'm going to draw a close with this last remark, actually, from Ntombizodwa Tula, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who just says, Deline, very much to your point, the culture of mass gathering in funerals is changing in South Africa. I attended relatives' funerals on Zoom and YouTube. They wouldn't allow me at my age to attend. But this is the key line, I'm getting used to it. And I think that's very much a part of the message that we all have to take on board. Can I say to all of you, once again, panelists, thank you so much for your contributions. That point that Mao made about knowledge sharing is precisely what we've done here over the last hour and a half. And to all the people watching, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your comments, your questions. We'll try and deal with as many of them as possible. At this juncture though, Maurizio, I throw the floor back to you, the virtual floor.
Thank you, and I hope you can hear me well. I see some, can you nod if you can hear me? Because it's here. So I just jotted some notes, and the first note is basically I start with a big thanks. We're having this conversation here after 1 year, and we wouldn't be having it in January hadn't been for this experience, where again, we've been literally holding the summary. The first one is interconnectivity. So the decision of taking, closing or moving or reshaping a mass gathering is not just for the organizer. Think of the Olympics. It's not just the Adidas or the big sponsor or the big cities or the big travel, but the little Japanese were investing his salary for 2 years to buy the little boots or selling T-shirts and so on. So there is a whole societal rippling of stakeholders that we appreciate now to evaluate. Communication is a key. It was how to communicate the decision and how to take stock of the feedback on this communication. The unity word. So the sharing of best practices, the lesson learned, the best science, the DNAs. We saw that in, we had vaccine in 1 year. So we discovered together in terms of science and in terms of anthropology, society, things that wasn't unthinkable 1 year ago, only 1 year ago. The very decision to change, to modify, is often not just a health concern, but implies certain societal and or political, and all of the player here underlined it. Then one thing, not all groups are equal, unfortunately. It's not just the set of NBA players in the bus, but the grassroots organization is the darts, the fencing in sport, or the smaller entities in the religious. And you mentioned at the end the grassroots problems. Those are the ones that if you don't go and play rugby in France or in other places, you go back to the society where maybe criminal or temptation and so on. So sports and activities and events are also having a large social determinants and this is often associated with the example of large mass gathering. The safety and the planning can be holistically. Helmut is gone, but it's not just being tested to go to the stadium, how to drive there, what you do when you're back home, and so on and so forth. The organizer, some of you there are organizer or represent organizers, Amy and Alt. That's true, and they're showing flexibility and readiness to adapt. So it's not just what you decide today, but how many times you have to change that decision month per month, in place to place, in country to country, because the situation evolves. And new knowledge and new solutions are coming. So that flexibility is becoming a Darwinian key of success in these extreme learning compressed times. And last but not least, I would like to close in what has been said: policy and mitigation measures should always attempt to go and represent the weaker, those marginalized, and those not induce any further discrimination in having or not having, has or not have. I just got a WhatsApp from a esteemed colleague in South Africa saying that 1 out of 5 doctors died in Zimbabwe because they have no vaccine. Or back to Bob's point. So the distribution and the, if the doctors and the nurses are dying, there is nobody else to take care of. So this is my final reflection, and the last word is just grazie, David. Grazie for you to being herding cats for this event and for the 3 preparatory. To the all people who contribute to this thinking, they will be having these thoughts in a collection, in a report, in articles to be taken. So expect you to be a further interview. We try to have articles published at the level of Times or BBC. And of course, all of those in the team who organized and help us to be here with you. David?
Well, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to everyone. I know we've run slightly over time now, but wherever you are in the world, keep safe and let's keep going. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mo. Bye, everyone.
Right.